go.
Artists are always on the lookout for things that might make a great painting, and I noticed this colorful sunset the other night on my way back to the ranch. So I stopped and took a photo, and here is the photo that we'll be using in today's exercise.
One of the first things you're going to want to do, of course, is set up your palette. As you can see here, for a palette, I'm using a piece of glass with the edges taped off for safety, and a piece of white paper taped behind it, which makes it easy to see the colors without seeing through to the mess underneath. As you can see, I've got my paints laid out in a pattern similar to the color wheel, starting with a big blob of white in the corner and neutrals on either end, and then going from violet to red-violet, red, red-orange, orange, and then skipping across the browns to yellow, yellow-green, green, blue-green, blue, and blue-violet. I put them in the same order every time, and that saves hunting and pecking, similar to learning where the keys are when you're typing. I always tell people it's not important to have a lot of expensive, lovely tools. It's fun, but it's not critical, and it's not related to your ability to paint at all. However, I will make one exception to that, and that is you do have to have some good brushes. You don't need a pile of good brushes. 2 or 3 really good ones will do. This shape that's rounded is called a filbert, and this is a rather cheap model here. One of the ways that you can tell a better brush is by the banding of the paint. For more information, I'll refer you to my book, The Mechanics of Art, that talks about this stuff in detail. 2 or 3 good filberts will see you through. And something about this size and possibly this size, and then again about that size will see you through anything you're going to need to do. 3 filberts, boar's bristle, as good a quality as you can afford. One thing artists like to argue about when we get together is what we use for our slops. And by slops, I just mean the painting medium that we use to wet our paint when we're actually putting it on the canvas. What I use is half turpentine and half linseed oil mixed with just a drop of cobalt cicative. And it's important to use only a drop of cobalt cicative, which is a kind of dryer that's manufactured out of cobalt, or sometimes in the Italian you'll see it copal. And it's made out of cobalt, as I say, which is why it's got that curious blue color to it. But if you put too much in hopes of making your paint dry faster, it will, over time, crack your paint film and make it break back off the canvas. 1 drop in a jar about this size is plenty. And it does speed up the drying process nicely so that you can immediately go back in the next day and paint again if you like to. And then I also keep this, this is called a silicoil jar. You can see mine's old and been used for a while. It has an actual metal coil down in it. And what you do with that is you use it to scrub up the paint out of your bristles, and then you can dry it on a rag and immediately use that brush again. Wonderful to have, and most professional artists that I know who work in oils use one of these. And of course, all this stuff's available from any paint supplier. And for a list of good suppliers, again, check out my book. In the appendices, there's a list of the good contact information for many of these best suppliers to use. I paint with rags. I always keep a rag in my hand. 100% cotton is the best. And you can wipe off mistakes. You can wipe off your brush. It's much better than paper towels, which are expensive to use and kind of wasteful. I just use old t-shirts, cut them down, throw them away when I'm done. Another benefit of the glass palette is that it enables you to use one of these razor blade handled scrapers to quickly clean your palette at the end of your session. A marvelous thing. Use the best paints you can buy, but you do not have to use the most expensive ones to be a good painter. But I will say this, if you begin using the student grade paints when you're starting out and learning to mix colors, you will have to learn all over again when you graduate to the good paints because they mix at a different rate. The good paints have a higher proportion of pigment versus oil, so the admixtures are different proportions. So I recommend to my students that they just go ahead and start off with the good quality paints. It'll make them feel better about themselves, and the paints are prettier, and they will last longer as well. And since they're stronger, they really don't cost you more in the long run. Today, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to be using this mill-made canvas. If I were doing a piece that I was going to one day try to get in a gallery, I would definitely use a hand-stretched canvas. Good dealers will not take you seriously as an artist if you have machine-made canvases. Today I'm going to be working from this photograph I took here at our ranch, and I've got it inside a plastic sleeve so that when paint gets on it, it gets on the plastic and not on the photograph. I'm going to be rearranging some of these elements to make it a better design. The thing I love about this technique is that it's very simple. You always know where you are in the process, and it takes out a lot of the guesswork, which makes you more comfortable, and as you have more confidence, makes you a better painter. This is not a technique I devised myself. This is something that was taught to me by a very great teacher named Dennis Parker of Taos, New Mexico. The first thing we're going to do is put our sketch on the canvas using yellow ochre paint. And the reason for using yellow ochre is because it's a particularly weak pigment, and if we want to begin painting on top of it right away, should it mix in with our other colors, it won't affect them very much, and that's nice. I strongly recommend against using charcoal pencil or even graphite pencil to do your sketching because it muddies the paint that goes on afterward. So the idea in this step is to loosely and quickly, without dawdling, generally lay out for yourself where the major elements of the painting are going to go. Think of it like breaking the picture down into a child's puzzle. You know how those kids' puzzles have maybe 5 or 6 major parts? And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because it's very difficult to really see where things go until you start to get the color on. So we're not going to punish ourselves by being perfectionists at this point. As long as you're within about 80%, I'm just basically telling myself, this part's house, that's sky, these are trees. This kind of bothers me because I've got the horizon right here at half. Just for the sake of good design, I'm going to bring it down a little bit because that will always bother people if I leave it there. If you divide your canvas neatly in two, people will always wonder, which is the most dominant, which is the most important, what's she saying here? So, you see how easy it is to make changes at this point. I'm not frustrated because I had to make a change because I don't have any time invested in it yet, right? Lovely. Now, this bush is in an awkward place. It's occluding our sunset, and it also leaves this side kind of naked. So I'm going to move this bush over here where I think it will give me more interest and better balance. Right about there. Poof! I'm done with my sketch. And here you can see the entire composition. What I'm going to do is block in these major masses with something that's about an 80% approximation of the final color that they're going to be. As I say, I'm not at all striving for perfection at this point. I'm just covering up the white canvas. You don't ever want to leave white canvas showing in a painting because A, it looks unfinished, and because B, over time, it will rot and turn brown and be ugly, as well as fall apart, and you don't want to do that to your collectors. Okay, at this point you're going to look at the painting and go, oh my gosh, it looks wild and unfinished and weird. It's because it's unfinished. Do not let that bother you. We'll come back over with the fine detail at a later point when we make sure that our drawing is in a good place. And the reason for that is, let's say you're doing a portrait and you do this really masterful eye, and it's the best eye you've ever painted, and you're so proud of it. But you don't discover until 3/4 through the painting that your eye is in the wrong place, and it's down here. All we're doing, as I say, is basically saying, this is sky, trees, bush, pasture, flower bed, building. We're just delineating where things are going to go. It's fun, it's liberating. Please don't dawdle on these parts. Again, I don't have a perfect match here. I see that this is broken into a bit that's pinker and a bit that's more yellow, and I'll do that later. But for now, I'm satisfied because I have something that is within about 80% of where it needs to be. I also see a little bit of the sky reflected down here in this cattle tank. So while I've got the color in my brush, I'm going to go ahead and insert that now to save a step later. Much easier than trying to go back and remix that color later on. Things in the far distance tend to be cooler and fuzzier than things in the foreground. So you never have a bright yellow in the far distance. You always soften that out. And this is greener. You can see it's greener than the trees in the photograph. I can darken that up and neutralize that out a little bit later. For right now, it's within my 80% of where I want it to be, and I'm okay with that. Now, as you can see here, I have blocked in this pasture area. And when I get ready to break this into smaller shapes and more detail, I will use that technique I was referring to a minute ago of using cooler grayer green here and leaving the yellow bits only in the foreground to make it go back into space. But for now, all I'm interested in is blocking in this big mass. Then this is really, I know in real life this is sandstone and it's reddish, but here most of the color has been sapped out of it by the low light. So I'm going to go with something pretty neutral. At this stage, you want all of your paint to be thin and flat to the canvas, because if you have ridges, when you come back to paint another layer on top, they're going to interfere with your new level of paint. Here, as you can see, I'm finished with the first lay-in. All the canvas is covered. It took me about 20 minutes. A lot of fun. I didn't dawdle and torture myself trying to get it perfect. Just had a good time.